Well, hi everybody. Welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. It's your host, Bill Whittle. We had a camera lockup, and you know what? It's not my problem. Anyway, sorry about that. This is going to be the interesting night of the See If You Can Stump Bill episode. And I have not seen any of the questions in Facebook yet, so I'm going to just go and take them kind of in the order that they are. And the rules were that the question had to be some kind of a question that could be answered with the narrative. It couldn't be like a math equation or a series of, really minute, data on how RNA replicates itself. But it could be about genetics, so that kind of thing. And the part I didn't include, because I think it'd make it more fun, is to say there's going to be a 5-minute time limit on this. And that's really working against me and for me, because if I do 5 minutes, we'll just call that a win for that topic. Okay, hi everybody, it's good to be back. Just a quick update on where we are and what we're doing. I just wrote 3 more of these TPUSA videos that we've been doing, We the People version 2.0. I just wrote number 4, which is corporations, number 5, which is government, and number 6, which is taxes. And we'll be shooting those tonight, knocking those out in the next couple of days, and then we'll try and get a firewall done or two in the next week or so. So getting back kind of our core constituency in terms of what we're good at, and also we're going to be taking Bill Whittle Live into an interview show format. We're going to do that today, but the person calling in had a Skype problem, so that's something we'll get to directly too. So we should do 3 or 4 live segments a week, I think. We'll do one recording and we'll cut them down, and we'll make most of those for members, and we'll have some out in the public, and you get the general idea. All right, here we go. All right, this is going to be fun. So let's see what we get here. Is there anything else I need to remember? No, everything's running. All right, terrific. Here we go. On the Let's See If You Can Stump Bill edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, which is episode 150, I believe. Let's see here. Let's see, what do we got? 104 comments. Awesome. All right, I'm just going to hit view more comments, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go with the ones that, just generally in order of, the thumbs up. The comments logic in Facebook is just ridiculous. Sorry, carrot, haven't anything to eat, hungry. All right, here we go. Looks like the first one, the highest ranked one, is from Scott Razor. Sorry, Scott. Razor? Here it is. This is a serious question that I was confronted with yesterday when a Stratolounger is in a store and Petula Clark's I Know a Place starts playing on the speakers in the store. What is the appropriate response? FYI, to sing and dance to the song, much to the horror of my children. And we are rolling. Well, first of all, I remember when I first heard the Petula Clark song. It's been a while since I showed it, but it was in a movie called Animato. And it was done by a guy whose name eludes me right now. It'll show up in the comments section in just a second. However, before computers and any of this stuff, back in, I want to say the late 70s when I was making Super 8 movies, there was a guy, I could find his, I don't want to. Yeah, I'm going to have to, because it's just not fair otherwise. Anyway, this guy was made these movies, and he did in-camera special effects, did basically just a lot of stop-motion animation, and the first one was really incredible. And then the second one was absolutely amazing. And I got the guy's name almost. Mike Jitlov, that's the guy. Mike is a really brilliant guy. So he did the kind of thing that's actually very, very easy to do today, because it's in After Effects. But basically what he did was he, by hand, did a series of layers and pushes and rotations. He used stills images. It was just incredible. And he used I Know a Place, and I just never forgot it. I thought it was tremendous. And the original idea for the Stratosphere Lounge was going to be, and still is, if we can ever get it done, was to be a TV talk show. And the kind of the opening credit conceit would be that you would you see people driving around Los Angeles, and they're looking for something, regular people. And there's no signs, there's no anything. And while they're driving around, we cut to kind of backstage, and we're getting ready to get dressed, and we're getting in our outfits, and we're doing our final notes and makeup and all the rest. And these things are just intercut together. And there's like one of these steel doors from a speakeasy, and a guy slides it open. If you look like a regular person, you come on and go down the stairs, and then we come out, and then all of the waitresses are PhDs, gorgeous, stunning dancer waitresses, but they're all doing like equations on a on a whiteboard in the back while they're waiting for their drink orders, that kind of thing. It's just going to be really fun. Pin lights and a real practical set. And the idea would be that it was underneath Hollywood, like directly underneath one of these studios. This kind of underground broadcasting, and so I know a place would be perfect for that. But to the part of the question that's really serious, I never cease to be amazed at how often people stop me, or every now and then I'll notice somebody's looking at me. At first I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? It's something on fire, and it's just nice to be recognized. And some people, there's probably enough of a web out there now, so that there would be enough people who would recognize the Petula Clark song, which is not very often played. So if it is played, you might have a reasonable chance of finding another Stratolanger in there. So what I would do if I were you, to answer your question, Scott, is I would make eye contact with anybody else who appears to be looking around. So if going forward, I think that would be the actual response to hearing Petula Clark. You don't want to do anything nutty like dance in front of your kids, because that's going to scar them for life. But if you basically hear the song and you look up, Bill's timing, Bill. If you sit around and look up and hear the song, and you just look around the room and kind of make eye contact, just see if anybody else is looking around the room too. And if they are, then you can kind of just stare at them for a second. They just kind of nod, like, huh? Not like a, hi, how's it going? It's kind of are you, you one too? And it's like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like being, I don't know, being gay in the 30s, or being an alcoholic at Alcoholics Anonymous. You can't really come out and say, here you are. And I think that's one of the problems. There's so many people out here are so afraid to speak up because they'll never work again. And that's kind of a circular thing, because the fact that they never speak up means that people think everybody out here is liberal. In any event, the thing to do would be to look around, try to make eye contact with anybody else who's looking around, and then secretly just kind of drift off into one direction. And when you get to where it seems like a quiet place, just introduce yourself, say hi, use your screen names. That's all it would take. I remember seeing meeting so many people, and came up and said hi. Turns out they were Stratosphere Lounge fans. And the second I saw their screen names, I went, oh my gosh, we've been friends. We've been watching the show for, God, 3 years. Oh, who am I kidding? 5 years now, I guess, 1912. 2012, something like that. So that's what I would say is the official procedure for what to do when you hear Petula Clark playing in a public place, and that's 5 minutes on the nose. Reset. Here we go. Steve Darrow. Do you believe General Patton was correct when he said, a good firewall video violently executed now and then is better than a perfect firewall video executed next week? I'm going to skip that one, Steve. It's a great question, but I'm going to try and do with actual real things here. So let me just kind of move on here. But let's see. You got another one right below it. Now you got me. I was wondering if we could play Stump the Monkey. And we have, let's see if I can tap dance my way onto this one. Right below it, he has a question. He says, I'm not sure if this is the kind of arcane question you're looking for, but why is it important to not have a vapor barrier as part of exterior wall construction in buildings in the South and Southwest United States? Well, it's because of the heat, Steve, obviously. You got to be careful with the heat. Most of the walls that you put into buildings you don't have to, you know what, I'm just going to give up. I just lose on this one. I really thought I could get through everything, and I have to say congratulations to you, Steve Darrow. I haven't got a clue what a vapor wall is. I've never even heard the term before. So there's one for Bill and one for the visitors. So well done, and I'm looking forward to hearing about what a vapor wall is, because I didn't think there were too many things I couldn't talk about, but I just got 10 seconds into that and I realized I got no idea. Okay, so moving on here. Let's see. G.K. Masterson. What kind of sensory organs do you think beings native to a universe with access to six spatial temporal dimensions, we have access to 3 spatial and 1 temporal, would have? Dimensions taken from Imagine the 10th dimension. What kind of sensory organs would creatures from the 6th dimension? 6-dimensional space. Well, here's what's interesting about that. There's a reset. Here's what's interesting about that, GK. Obviously, nobody knows. Nobody knows nothing about what kind of sensory organs might be in a 6-dimensional creature, because nobody knows whether there are 6-dimensional creatures or whether there is a 6th dimension. So all we can do is we can try to do what we've always done when dealing with other dimensions, and that's look down as a way of trying to get our heads into looking up. First of all, if you believe, as I've come to believe, certainly, that that time is not a real dimension, it's a spatial dimension that we 3-dimensional beings are traveling through. So when you think about an object, this fabulous Stratosphere mug, for example, you would say that this thing has 3 dimensions. It has height, it has width, and it has depth. But that's actually not true. It actually has 4 dimensions. It has height, it has width, it has depth, and it has duration. Never thought about that until very, very recently. Isn't that cool? It's got duration. So it is actually, in fact, a 4-dimensional object. And if you were to take a look, if you could see the dimension, the 4th dimension as we travel through it, it would be, it's a dimension that's at right angles to the other 3. Now, in 3 dimensions, obviously, that's impossible. But you can almost get there, almost, by kind of almost moving yourself up and down, up out of the diagonal and looking down on a 3-dimensional world with a, 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, and 3 dimensions like that. You can almost take yourself back out there and imagine it. So what you have to do, I think, is you have to make a couple of assumptions. First of all, I think, without question, one of their organs would be a time organ, because since we are moving through the 4th dimension, that would be accessible to somebody who was a 6th-dimensional creature. Now, needless to say, it doesn't. We can't possibly get into what that organ would be like, although maybe we can. There seems to be a real problem with. There we go. See you later, Linda. Bye bye. So what would this memory organ look? When we say a memory organ, it would be an eye that could see into the past and the future, which to us would simply be an eye that could see in the 4th dimension. If you take a flatlander and you present him with a circle, he doesn't see a circle. All he sees is a line that is the diameter of the circle. He has to kind of walk around that. We know that even with 3-dimensional eyes, presumably, if we could get into the 4th dimension, you would be able to see inside of everything. Now, what that means is if you imagine a 2-dimensional world and you've got a little box and there's a little hole in the box. So it's virtually a square, but there's a little hole cut in the square. A 2-dimensional being on a flatlander, if he's on the side of the box that doesn't have the hole in it, he doesn't see what's inside the room. Let's just call it a flat room. He has to walk all the way around. He has to get over to where the hole in the square is. He has to go inside the square in order to see what's inside the square. But because we have a 3-dimensional perspective, we're able to look down upon the square. We can see the relationship of this flatlander to the square. We can see he's not on the side that would allow him to see in yet. We can watch him travel around and look in, but the whole time we can see all of it. We can see what's inside the building. If there's flatlanders inside the building, we see the inside of the flatlanders as well. Because somebody pointed out that if a flatlander had a digestive system, it would basically fall into 2 parts, because it would separate them all the way through. So looking down on the 2nd dimension gives us a chance to get some kind of idea on what it might look like in the 6th and so on. So at least as far as 4th dimension goes, a 4-dimensional being looking down on our world would be able to see everything that we see, but they would also be able to see the inside of everything and the outside at the same time. It's kind of hard to imagine that somebody could be peering into this room and not just looking into the room. They're looking inside. They can see all of my internal organs. They can see what's inside all the cameras. They can see inside of these things because they're blocked by 3 dimensions but accessible by 4. Now, based on that series of really terrific and very interesting videos that the guy did, I think we're talking about a sensory organ for time, and then we're talking about a sensory organ that would allow him or her, hilarious, would be none of those things, that would allow such a creature to not only see time, all of it in its entirety, they would also be able to have to see alternative timelines, because if there's a 6th dimension, that means you have alternative histories and alternative timelines. So probably the closest thing I could describe to what that might look like would be, imagine you're in a huge room. Let's say you're in a Office Depot or something. You put yourself up in one of the corners of the room. Now you're looking down onto the floor of the room. You're not looking from the 4th dimension, but imagine that you were. Just take yourself up into another dimension. You're looking down on the room. You can see inside of all the people, but you don't see individual people walking around. What you see are these kind of worms where people are moving in 3 dimensions, but back and forth, like a guy guarding a security guard, back and forth. But he's not really moving back and forth. He's moving back and forth as he moves through time, through the 4th dimension. The Earth doesn't really orbit the sun. The Earth is basically in a spiral around the sun as the sun moves, and so on and so on and so on. So it's all that. Now you're looking down at all these people. You can see inside them. You can see all of these things, and you can see the worms that would represent their space through 4 dimensions. So you're in the 5th dimension, looking down on 4, so you can see all of this. Then you look over here, and off to the side is an entirely different universe, completely different, absolutely different, and there are an infinite number of them floating around. You get to look at each one of them and can examine them and so on. So if you had any kind of sensory organs in the 6th dimension, I imagine it would be something a bit like that. I think we'll give me that one, 2-1. Here we go. So that was G.K. Masterson. I'm just trying to read here to see where we are. Oh, here's Stephen Darrow. All right, why not? Apparently Stephen Darrow, our friend Stephen Darrow, is in construction. So this question is pretty simple. It's compliance with the International Building Code and the International Energy Conservation Code is required in the construction of a building. Why is one a proper role of government and the other is not? I think that's pretty interesting and good question. Ding, here we go. The idea of having building standards, you can make the case, and I think you can make a good case, for this being something that is in fact a proper function of government. The idea that the Energy Conservation Code is so arbitrary and so controlling that it shouldn't be, I think is probably where we're going. I'm going to get to the details now. Libertarians, every time I say anything about libertarians, I get these libertarians just yelling at me that you don't know anything about libertarianism. So whatever you want to call these people, anarcho-libertarians, there is in fact a group of people who have the political philosophy that call themselves libertarians, whether they are or not, but there's a philosophy that basically says, if you leave everyone alone and there are no laws, then everybody will act in their own best interest, and therefore that's why you don't need any laws or any government or anything. Their argument with the building code situation would be, well, if they don't build according to code and if they build shabby buildings, not only will they lose customers, but if one of these buildings collapses, they're going to be victims of, they'll be subject to lawsuits. And this kind of thing is going to keep everybody straight and everybody honest. And I find that kind of thing to be as wishful as communism and the new man. It is very nice to think that there are people who could behave that way, and I bet you most of us could, and I'll bet you virtually all of the people watching this show could. I bet there are millions and millions of people who could function pretty much all right like that because we do the right thing because it's the right thing. We have a sense of respect for other people's feelings. Forget their feelings. We have a sense for their physical being and all of this stuff. So enforcing standards of inspection to me seems like a legitimate job for the government, because a government has to assume that there are going to be people, lazy people, evil people in the system, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if there was no inspection system, you would get people cheating. When I was in Thailand, I saw the most unbelievable thing. Really, they were building these gigantic, 20, not that high, 7, 8, 10-story concrete apartments, and they were building one right near where I was staying. And as I looked up into this thing, it was still open. There was a column. It looked like it was a load-bearing column, and it had the outside was pretty much done and plastered, and inside, instead of poured concrete, there was just masses and masses and masses of smashed up concrete blocks. So instead of just poured concrete here, they had lots and lots, essentially, of rocks in there, and they were all packed on top of each other, and this thing was supporting something. And I imagine that's a cheaper way to go than to pour your own concrete and so on, but I wouldn't imagine they hold up quite as well. And I saw this, and I remember thinking, so what's going to happen here? I mean, what would happen if the thing fell down? I don't know how you would sue people. My fiance in Russia basically says that any kind of property rights, any kind of property concerns, that kind of thing, are determined by the government. And if you've got a big, speaking of whom, here she is. And if you've got the money to bribe the judge, then you win. That's how it works in much of the world. But this inspection thing in Thailand was clear to me that nobody was inspecting this. I was in Pattaya, which is like a resort part of Thailand, and the first thing I noticed as I was driving in from Bangkok Airport, it's about a 2-hour drive by bus, I noticed that as you got closer and closer to the city, there were more and more wires going into the power cables, and these were not strung by professionals. And the closer you got in there, the more this thing looked like a bird's nest. And finally, by the time you got into the heart of this resort town, Pattaya, pretty much everything has these illegal, extremely unsafe connections where people at nighttime have basically just shimmied up the pole, attached their building's power supply to the city's power supply, and they're getting free power. And I was walking down the street in Pattaya. This is about building codes and inspection and all the rest. And I was walking down the streets in Pattaya, and I noticed that the power lines dipped down to about the level of my nose. And as you'd go from one pole to another, these power lines would just dip down. And I went in to check on a little T-shirt shop, because in Pattaya you have 3 buildings. You have laundromats, you have massage parlors, and you have T-shirt shops. That's the entire economy. And I walked into one of these things, and I'd seen some people working, some official people working on the wires down there. And all of a sudden I hear this unbelievably loud bzzzt like that. I come running out, and some guy had a wooden pole, like a mop, wooden pole on a mop, and 2 wires, metal wires coming out of the top, and he was basically testing to see which lines were live. And I just thought, oh my God. I mean, this thing made just a pretty near, really thought somebody got cooked. So the idea that that people are going to behave themselves and do the right thing all the right time for the right reasons is just not true. And it's not true in Thailand. It's not true in the United States either. People will cheat. Airlines, you would think, if you ever held the belief that this would work, that people could police themselves, you would imagine then that of all the businesses in the United States, of all the different subcultures and all the rest, you would imagine that pilots in aviation would be, if not the most compliant, maybe after engineers or something, but certainly they would be in the top 3 or 4 professions that take safety seriously, that take professionalism very seriously. That's what being a pilot's all about. And with that said, we find again and again and again, previously anyway, that maintenance corners were cut, and we know that they were cut because they led to fatalities. We haven't had a fatality on a major jetliner on a U.S. carrier in 16 years. It's astonishing, really. But those things have to be inspected because people will cut the corners. And a lot of it is also not like, hey, you know what, I'm going to cut the corners on maintenance. It's just kind of like, you know what, I've got to let this thing go. It's not a big deal. I'm going to let it go. And then it goes and it doesn't fail and doesn't fail and doesn't fail. Pretty soon you assume that it's not going to fail. And then you go further and further and further away from the norm. So that's the reason why you should have an international building code. Now, the reason you should not have an international, energy conservation code Well, there's a lot about that. First of all, energy conservation code is a great luxury. A building you need to survive. People have to have shelter or else they die. The shelter could be heated by any number of things. You could have electricity would be nice, natural gas heaters maybe. Maybe you have both. Maybe you've got an oil burning furnace, but maybe your shelter or your house is burning wood, or maybe it's burning whatever. The environmental impact on the house is going to depend on the culture. It's going to depend on all of these things. It's going to depend on the fuel sources, how clean the fuel sources are, how expensive they are, how available they are, and so on. And you cannot make standards, I think, that apply all around the world. If you were to take the standards, the emission standards in California, which I would bet are the best in the world, I cannot imagine a place where they're higher than they are here. If you were to take just the emission standards on cars, for example, speaking of energy conservation, if you were to take the emission standards on cars and try to apply those anywhere in the world, most people simply would not have cars. They just couldn't comply with it. It cost too much money, and too much money to inspect and all the rest of it. So energy conservation is kind of a relative term, unlike safety. Gravity is pretty much constant, and so is the amount of compression that a concrete pillar can take and all the rest. So I think that's probably the reason why you would want to have one of those things appropriate for government and another one not so appropriate, because energy conservation is in the eye of the beholder, and who's conserving what where is not something that can be done by a government, forget internationally. And I'll give myself a point for that one too, 3-1. We are playing Stump Bill tonight, honey. Try to find questions that I couldn't answer. So far, 3 for me and 1 for Stephen Darrow, who completely stopped me with something I never heard before. All right, moving on. Here we go. Looks like I'm just going right down the list here. Matthew Lloyd says, how do you think life began? Do you really think human consciousness could have started from a special mixture of inanimate substances with the magic ingredient of time? Or do you really think there's some kind of all-powerful entity we can't scientifically prove exists who created reality and life itself simply through thought? Or do you really believe door number 3? That's a really good question, Matthew. Dink. All right, here we go. I think there's extremely good physical evidence to say that life can evolve out of essentially the chemicals that the universe is constructed out of. There doesn't seem to be any unbreachable chasm between when Carl Sagan basically, I think it was Sagan, basically took the atmosphere of Jupiter, which is hydrogen, helium, methane, and ammonia, passed a spark through it as if through lightning. And when amino acids, basically brown amino acids, just kind of, slid down the side of the beaker, that is very, 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 very compelling evidence. Amino acids are the things that are the building blocks of life, at least in terms of carbon life, like we have here on Earth. I think they're the four different coded parts of our DNA, GTAC, I want to say. Cyanine, guanine, thiamine, and anyway, there's 4 of these things that you have to put together in DNA. One bonds with the other. They can't bond with others, and the sequence that these things bond in is what provides the genetic information that passes down, whether you're going to be an ant or an elephant. So there doesn't seem to be any particularly sharp cliff that separates any one step from the hydrogen and helium and methane ammonia in the universe to the pinnacle of human creation, which I think we can all agree is Michael Moore. So there's no walls between any of these steps. So, but this is why my answer is quite nuanced, if I say so myself. So, I'm told by Wild Goose that experiment was a hoax. In any event, we do see elements. We do see elements of the building blocks of life pretty much scattered throughout the universe. It's not like this is the only place where we find these things. So they're out there. There's a theory called panspermia. Is it something like that? Where basically they think that life is everywhere. It's on the surface of comets, and these complex molecules are basically exist pretty much everywhere. And when one of these things hits the Earth, then it grows here, grows there, grows everywhere. Life is everywhere. It's a possibility, I guess. But I'm just now finishing writing the thing on taxes, and one of the things I wrote about on taxes is is how much money $3.5 trillion is, and there's a couple of really excellent videos showing how many stacks of how many $100 million cargo pallets it would take to make $1 trillion, and it's a lot of them. And we spend $3.5 trillion a year. So I mention that just to say that we have no idea of the extent of how long 3 billion years is. Probably 3 billion more or less. Earth's been around 4.6 billion years. So 3 billion years, we think, oh, well, that's quite a long time compared to what we're used to, but is that enough time? 3 billion years it's an unimaginably big amount of time. It's unimaginably large. So yeah, I think the materials are there, and I think the time is there, and I don't see, as I said, anything that stops it. Now to the interesting part. Everything that we talk about when we talk about life being formed in the universe and given enough time. I think you said that was at the magic juice. That was a nice term. The magic ingredient of time. So yes, standing here in our three-dimensional universe, connecting to what we talked about earlier, you can look at this and say that this started in 3 billion years before this is, and these were little molecules, and then they turned into parameciums, and then they turned into little sea jellyfish or whatever the case may be. So there you go. We think, oh, we got from here to here, but that's assuming that time is linear, and I don't believe it is. I've come to believe, just based on some evidence, that time is a structure. It's a dimensional structure. It's if you were falling down a tube, like some kind of a grain chute or something, you're riding down a infinitely long water slide. You're inside this thing and it's moving, and all you see is the part of it that you're in. But if you look at it from the outside, you can see the whole water slide. So I think that the universe is built that way. And what that means is there is no before and after. If the universe is built the way I suspect it is, it's built all at the same time, and it was always there, and it will always be there. And so that raises the question of how did that 4-dimensional or 6-dimensional or 11-dimensional structure, how did that come into being? And this is why I like this question so much, Matthew, because questions like this run us right up against the limit of our monkey brains. It's the absolute great thing to realize that you get to the point where you realize, if you're intellectually honest and you're not one of these guys like Dawson or Sagan or the rest of it, if you're intellectually honest, you realize that there comes a point where no matter how smart any individual human is, he's going to be limited by the number of neurons. And even if he's got an incredibly nice little convoluted brain and all the rest of it, he's still going to be limited, still going to be limited by the simple number of neurons that we can use to process. In other words, I do believe that we're descended from how do I want to put this? From a proto-human ancestor, and we didn't come from apes. Apes and humans split off. The whole evolution tree, I think there's absolutely overwhelming evidence for. Overwhelming. But that's not the part that interests me. The part that interests me is if we think about this happened and then that happened, but what if that's an illusion? What if the whole thing is just a record? So let's just go here for a second. Imagine that the universe is an LP, it's an album, and we're the needle. And so as the needle stands there, and the needle actually doesn't move, but it feels like it's moving around the grooves, it vibrates and we hear the music. And you've got, let's say, 5 tracks on this LP. Well, if you say, well, which track came first, you could say, well, this track was recorded first, but it wouldn't be true to say that this track appeared first. The entire LP was stamped out at once. Boom, stamped out. And then if you ask somebody, well, what part of this song is more real than another one, that argument doesn't make any sense either. It's just patently narrow-minded to think. If you were to say to somebody, I think that, or if you were to talk to somebody who lived in the music and the needle, they would say to you, well, the only part of the song that's real is the part that's happening now. And there's another part of the song coming up in the future. I can remember the songs and the notes that happen behind me, says this person who lives in a phonograph needle. I can't see what's coming up in the needle in front of me, in the groove in front of me, but basically the only instant that counts is the now. Everything else disappears or has not appeared yet. And that's how a person living in the musical needle would look at things. But we all know that when you hold up an LP, there's no part of that record's more real than another part. You can go back to the first track of the first song again and again and again and again and again. You play it as many million times as you want to. And it's no more real than the fifth track. The fifth track is also real. You can jump back and forth. You put that needle wherever you want to on any one of those tracks, and you can hear whatever part of the album you want to hear. And that is a great way for me to get a handle on what I think essentially has happened with the universe. It is accessible, and that time as we understand it does not exist. Everything that happens, including free will, is built into this thing at the same, well, I want to say at the same time, but see, this is the monkey brain part. This is where we cannot go. We just can't go there. Mathematics, I'm sure, can go to some places. It's a language I don't speak, but even mathematics is a limit to things that we can understand. So we can't go there. So if this universe is like some giant, 4-dimensional, 6-dimensional, 11-dimensional construction, and we say it's always been there, the human part of our minds, which is all of it, but the limitations of our minds say, okay, yes, I understand that, but what was there before it got there? And you would say, well, nothing. Well, it's always been there. Yeah, I understand it's always been there, but surely something must have happened before it came. No, you cannot understand infinity. You can't do it. You can't understand eternity. They're just beyond our ability to do it. This idea that a new universe spins off every time a pigeon, poops on a car in a different location, spins off a whole new universe. Well, technically, every time quantum atoms interact, they would presumably break off into entire new parallel universes. There'd be hundreds of trillions of them created every single instant. And you'd think, my God, there's no way that could possibly happen. And then you realize you do not understand infinity. You do not understand infinity. How much space would it take to take an entire universe that we can see that's, trillions and trillions of light years across and from one end of the known universe to the other, and every single time something happens on either, you're making a new copy? Where would you put it? And the answer is you'd put it in infinity, because it doesn't matter how big or how many there are. Infinity is infinity, and we cannot get there. We can get there as a model. We can say to ourselves, well, okay, I can kind of imagine it, but we can't. Same with time. You can't imagine the idea that something was there before this, or nothing was there before this. You can't understand how, if this universe is like a record, and it's all there, and it's all in one place at one time, and it's just punched out of something. You can't understand how free will could be baked into that, because you would think that one thing has to happen and then I do the other thing, but your free will is built into it. All the decisions that you made when I say made or will make, we're back again to time. We're talking about things that happened in the past or in the future, and we run up against it. We can't get past it, no matter how hard you try. Another great example of this is, and I'm getting to your answer because I basically think I've already made the case for a pretty good case for there's a material explanation for all this. You also can't get past infinity. So, for example, we now believe there's a Big Bang, explodes out, and all of the universe is inside it. And in fact, it's not just that that the galaxies are moving through space. Space itself is getting bigger. It's space-time. The emptiness of the vacuum is actually enlarging as this thing goes. So everything's moving away from everything else, in the same way that if you had a balloon and you put a bunch of little dots on it, and then you blew up the balloon, all the dots would move away from each other, and each one of the dots would think that everything else is moving away from it, but they're all moving away from each other. The universe is expanding. And then you hit the monkey brain again. Expanding into what? What do you mean? Expanding into what? If there's a boundary on the universe, it's the edge of the explosion. If this is as far as we can see, because that's when things began, that's where the universe expansion is, on the far side, what's on the other side of that? And we want to think that there's something like a celestial sphere. We can walk up to the edge of it, or fly in our Starship Enterprise, and fire some phasers at it, and get to the other side and look and see what's on the outside of the universe. No, there's nothing out there. This is the part where I just love it so much. You cannot get there. Cheryl just pointed out I've gone way longer than 5 minutes, but I think 5 minutes is the minimum. I know I did say the maximum, but I don't care. I'm having fun. So, what's on the other side of the universe? Nothing. What do you mean, like a vacuum? No, I mean nothing. It doesn't exist. There's no existence on the other side of this thing that does exist. We can't handle it. We can't handle it. So, to answer your question, Matthew, about a human consciousness and so on, I think that there's more and more information every day that's leading me to believe, based on quantum experiments, leading me to believe that the universe is not constructed out of matter and gravity and energy and all the rest. It's actually built out of information. That's a heck of a thought. And the reason I say this is because we know, experimentally proven thousands of times, probably every second, with all the quantum stuff that goes on in all our computing and so on, we know that if we observe something, we force reality to make a decision. Our monkey brains, and I don't want anybody to think I'm putting monkey brains down, because what we've been able to accomplish with this, cantaloupe-sized hunk of gray jelly is absolutely unbelievable. I'm speaking to you now through time and space. Some of you are seeing me 4 or 5 seconds after I say these words. Some of you are watching on YouTube. They see it maybe a year later or 10 years later, 100 years later, whatever. So I'm talking to you through time and space right here, and we can do this with our monkey brains, but we butt up against the ununderstandable when you get to this. And that's why mathematicians can kind of get there, because they're not having to visualize the reality of it. There's just a mathematical series of equations. So what I believe is that this universe is constructed from information. And I say that because the more we look at things, the more we change things. The finer we look at things, the finer things have to change. The act of observing things on a quantum level compresses the quantum probability. It's Schrodinger's cat, right? The cat is half alive, half dead. 50-50 chance of it being dead or alive. According to quantum, the cat is not either dead or alive, and we don't know. The cat is both dead and alive. It is both states at the same time. And then when we open the box, all of these quantum events compress down, and the universe makes a decision. If it's a random chance between 50-50, as long as nobody's watching, it stays unresolved. But when you observe it, you are forcing the universe to comply. Now, I know that sounds like a hell of a bizarre thing to say, but it's absolutely true. It's what happens on the quantum level. And since we're built out of these things, it's true on the major levels as well. So while I believe that life can mechanically exist in this universe of ours, if you get past before and after, and if you come to the realization that that observation creates reality, then you are left with something really kind of interesting, and that is pretty much this. Dave Wellman points out it's not 50-50, it's 100-100. That's exactly right. 100% chance the cat's dead, 100% chance it's alive too. What? We won't know until we open it. That's nicely said. I really want to keep on to that. So if it's made out of information, if observation affects the structure of the universe, forces the universe to make a decision, then you get into what the great guy who's done the 10th Dimension videos had to say. He said, then you come up with the realization that life didn't evolve from the universe. The universe evolved from life. The consciousness was there, and the consciousness of observation created the world by making a decision by observation. We observe something, the quantum state decides, goes all the way, cascades all the way down. And so the more we observe, the more we create. And then if it turns out that our little monkey brains, God bless them all, are able to understand this and set up experiments to prove that it's true, and based cell phones and all the rest of it on this technology, if we can experimentally prove that this is true, and we can repeatedly prove that this is true, that if there are two particles that are separate, in fact, it's an incredible experiment. I'm surprised nobody's been talking about it more. they had a there's something about it, it's called entanglement, where if you make a decision on one quark or one of these particles, the other one has to decide instantaneously to be the other thing. And instantaneously is not something that we have been able to deal with, because Einstein said that the fastest that anything can travel in the universe is the speed of light. That's as fast as the signal can go. But they actually did an experiment, and it was something to the effect of, there were like two labs that were something like, I don't know, maybe they're 100 miles apart, kilometers apart. It was in Europe. And our ability to measure time now with atomic clocks is so unbelievably precise that basically what they did was they had a time cube, and they made this observation on this particle, and the entangled particle in the other lab changed, and it changed faster than the speed of light would have been to get from one town to another. In other words, they said it was at least 14 times faster. It may have been infinitely faster, but the signal, to their ability to measure it, the signal traveled faster from one lab to another than the speed of light. That is really something. So we observe something, and instantly, on the other side of on a different lab, other side of the room, other side of the universe, 100 trillion light years away, it instantly changes. Then you start thinking about the universe as being the result of observation. And we are able to make observations with our tiny little human brains, but it is entirely possible, may in fact be inevitable to the degree that we can understand such things, that something that has the information structure of this universe, the subtlety of it, I mean, this thing could have been an 8-bit universe, and we would have, flat galaxies and, 3 colors and all the rest of it. But no, the complexity of it, all the way down to the microscopic level and into the huge, huge universe, the complexity of it, if observation creates reality, that means that that this universe had to be created by a being of such monumental consciousness that it was simply able to observe it into existence. And I suppose the best way you could put that would be to say it spoke it into existence. Speech is an idea. I have an idea, and I speak it. Most of the time, I speak it before I have the idea, but most common people would say they get the idea and then they speak it. That's why I always get in trouble. So if you speak something, you think about something, you have to think about it before you could speak it. And when in the beginning of the Bible, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, okay. Actually, somebody told me that the translation is much more subtle than that. That the actual translation is not "let there be light," but it is "let light be." Not "let there be light," let light be. Let it become what it needs to be. So that's my answer. I happen to think that this entirely mechanical universe is constructed by the observations of a consciousness so far beyond our little abilities that you can call him whatever you want to. And then the question is, well, what about the afterlife and all that other stuff? And you think, well, why would being that powerful care about us and what happens to us? Why would he save us? Why would he save the pattern? And the answer is because he can. Because he can, because it can, because it's the kind thing to do. As they get more and more consciousness, as people become more and more aware, even in our little world, the more you think, generally speaking, and certainly the more experience you have with other people, the kinder you become. And so a creature of that monumental level of consciousness would be infinitely kind. And if it was capable of saving these patterns, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, since it created them in the first place, then why wouldn't it save them? Why wouldn't it take them to a happy place afterwards? Would you do it if you could? I mean, if you could, would you do it? If you could find a way to bring back a dog or a squirrel that gets run over, and you had the physical ability to take that squirrel into a laboratory, bring it back to some kind of life, and have the squirrel then think that it's in paradise forever, would you do it? I would do it. Why not? It's the kind thing to do. So there you go. That was a heck of a question, but I'm going to give that one to me. I think that's bing, 4-1. I may be 4-2. I don't care. Matthew Lloyd says, if the right to keep and bear arms extends to weapons the founding fathers didn't have, why does it or not or does it not extend to tanks, fighter planes, and nuclear weapons? What's the definition of arms? That's a great question, and it's something I've thought about an awful lot. There are two things you can say about this. One of them is, the simple one is, you should have the right to keep and bear whatever arms are going to be used against you. I think that's a pretty compelling argument. If the entire purpose of the Second Amendment is to defend you from the government, defend you from people telling you what to do, forcing you to do things at the point of a gun, if giving the power of a firearm to individual people is to stop encroachment on their liberties, then you have to ask yourself, what are the encroachers going to be coming at you with? And they're not going to be coming at you with muskets. And unfortunately, they're not going to be coming at you with just AKs or AR-15s either. They're going to be coming at you with tanks, and they're going to be coming at you with drones, and they're going to be coming at you with all kinds of things. So I think ethically, you should have the ability to defend yourself against the government, and that means you should be allowed to have whatever weapons are necessary to stop it. And that means anti-tank weapons. It means, bazookas. It means tanks. Can you own your own tank? I say, oh, yes, you can own your own tank. Now, the question is, how far up can you run this? And the question is, can you run this, to example, for nuclear weapons? Should everybody be allowed to have a nuclear weapon? And I think the answer to that is clearly no. And this has to do with something, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I read it. I just can't. I wish I could. But this is a common problem for me. But basically the argument is that a nuclear weapon raises the level of ambient risk to make it too intolerable. Ambient risk. What does that mean? Well, we know when we get up in the morning that we're taking a risk. We're going to go outside. We're going to get in our car. We're going to drive around. We're going to... all these activities involve risk. You could fall down the stairs. You could get hit by a car, killed by a bus. You can have a heart attack. You can have all these things. But this is the risk that we all accept. This is a very low ambient level of risk in this society anyway, extremely low. And we all have to endure it. So on some level, it's like a 1 atmosphere, oxygen. It's like 1 atmosphere of air, or it's like 1 g of gravity. It's what we grew up with. Ambient risk is ambient risk, and as long as nobody disturbs the ambient risk, then so far so good. Now, if somebody decided to shoot somebody with a firearm, that would be alarming to the person being shot at. And needless to say, their level of risk would go up, but the ambient risk would not. The overall ambient risk of a society would not really go up based on something like that. But with a nuclear weapon, it would. You would then have millions of people whose lives are dependent upon the sanity of the person owning that weapon. And it's not a question of encroachment, because a guy has a nuclear weapon, let's say a real one. Let's say he's got an H-bomb. He's got a megaton H-bomb in his apartment in Sherman Oaks, down in the closet. And he's got a button to pull that any single time. And so now the fate of millions of people depend on this person's sanity, this person's resilience. There depends on all of it. And that is not an acceptable level of ambient risk, especially when it's one individual. Right now we have that same kind of thing with governments. I mean, right this second here in Sherman Oaks, it's possible that the Russians or the Chinese or the French or the British or the Indians could just decide to nuke this building. But since there are so many safeguards there, the ambient risk of that is very low. Give it to an individual and the ambient risk becomes higher and intolerable. And a better way to think about this, I heard this as part of the example. And basically somebody said, if you go into a bar, let's say at nighttime, and you go into the bar and there are people there that have concealed carry permits, you're still at a more or less ambient level of risk. You wouldn't even know they have them. And since they tend to be responsible people, nothing's going to happen because nobody's going to draw a weapon and so on. But if somebody points a gun at you, now your risk level is intolerably high. You cannot simply abide this. You can't simply say, oh, well, I'm just going to go on with this person pointing a gun at my head for the rest of my life. And my entire life is dependent on whether or not this person decides to take my life or not. That's not acceptable level of risk. That's why my dad told me very early, and took me a long, long time to understand, long time. He said, if you point a gun at somebody, you better shoot him. and I couldn't understand it. I could not until I did, which is when you point a gun at somebody, you have threatened them. You have basically put their lives into your hands, and they have every single right in the world to get their life out of your hands. So if you're going to point a gun at somebody, you better shoot him, because if you don't, he's going to come after you. And I think that's completely appropriate. Somebody points a gun at me, and I'm holding a beer bottle, and then they turn around for a minute or bend over to tie their shoelaces. I'm going to smash the guy on the head. I'm not going to do that if he's got a concealed carry permit. See how it works? So if the guy's behaving himself, minding his own business, got a concealed carry permit, I'm not going to knock the guy out and disarm him. But if the guy points a gun at me and then he bends down to tie his shoelaces, then I'm going to knock him out. I'm going to take his gun and we'll arrest him, because that kind of behavior has made unacceptable risk. So I think you basically have to kind of parse this out and say that, to me, AR-15 is not raising the ambient risk. If you have one and you live next door to me, that doesn't really raise the risk of me, certainly doesn't raise the risk of the people in the next 10, 20 mile radius. If you have a tank, you probably raise the risk a little bit, but again, not so much, But if you have a nuclear weapon or a biological weapon, then everybody has an ambient risk level so high, then you are essentially pointing a gun at people's head, and they have to hope that you're going to be rational enough to not kill them. And that's not something you should have to do. You're taking somebody's, you are adding so much risk to that individual that the individual has a right to respond and to and reduce it back to the ambient level. Okay, that's good. Good question. I might have to, I'm just reading it now, it could be a repeat of what we talked about. Merlin Wendelboe says, what is more likely, that the universe sprang into existence with all universal constants fine-tuned to products life and eventually produce self-aware This is so close to what I just did. He's getting into the idea that this might be a simulation, but to be honest with you, I'd have to go over so much ground that I already went over. I'm just going to pass that one. Matthew Lloyd says, does welfare create an incubator allowing, even encouraging, low IQ populations to propagate at accelerated rates? Is that a necessary evil? What impact does lowering the average IQ of a population have on our society? Well, that ought to be easy to do without any controversy. There is absolutely no question. I think it's I. I think that when you talk about intelligence, we say IQ, or intelligence quotient, but I think the raw gauge of intelligence is represented by I, the letter I. And that's what a person's I rating would, again, the letter I, their I represents how intelligent they are, potentially working at full potential. It's not so much related to tests or anything like that. Let's not split hairs. Let's just, on second, let's just call it IQ because it's easier to say. There's no question, none, that IQ correlates very, very closely to crime and poverty. I mean, that's just not up for discussion. And not only is it experimentally proven, and not only is it not experimentally proven, not only is it factually proven, it makes perfect sense, right? IQ and crime, low IQ and crime are linked. And what's interesting about this is that there are so many things in the world that we believe that never really existed. We just believe them because we saw them in movies. A great example of this would be that some lawmakers are trying to get rid of silencers on guns. They're trying to ban silencers. They're already banned, and the NRA is trying to bring them back in for hearing protection. And this one woman, whose name escapes me, a congresswoman, is basically saying we cannot allow these silencers into the population because then it would be just too easy to kill somebody. And I realize what they're thinking is, what this woman is thinking is that if you put a silencer on a gun, you pull the trigger, it goes thwip, 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 and if you put a pillow over the front of it, it muffles it even more. But that's not what happens. That is Hollywood. That does not exist at all. If you want to split hairs, I think there's an MP5 that fires a subsonic round, and the only thing you hear is the sound of the bolt firing. But in any event, There is no such thing as a silencer. There are sound suppressors, and when you fire a suppressed weapon, it goes from 150 decibels, which is rupture of your eardrums, down to about 120 decibels, which is the sound of a jackhammer. So why am I bringing all this up? Well, it's like this. Why am I bringing that up? The IQ, I have no, it'll come to me. Maybe it's just having to do with the fact that that you are dealing with data that's out there and that you refuse to see. In other words, this woman who wanted to put a silencer on guns could solve this problem about whether or not they really silence guns with 10 minutes on the range. You have them fire a couple of weapons without any hearing protection on, and then you fire some weapons with the suppressor on. Actually do it in reverse order. Fire some with the suppressor on, that's loud. Then fire some without the suppressor on, that's shockingly loud. And then that person will not have those delusions anymore. So when you get to IQ, you deal with crime. I remember where I was going with this finally. One of the things that movies invented were the silencer, the idea of a silencer. And on a very similar kind of a parallel track is the idea that that there are super criminals. That, you know, I remember in the 60s they had all these awesome, cat burglar things like Jack Diamond, Prince of Hearts, and he rappels down the outside of a skyscraper, and he's wearing a black turtleneck and black pants, and he's got black gloves, and he's got a mask on, and he's got a thing with a diamond, and he cuts a hole in the glass, and he pulls a thing out, and he gets inside, opens up the vault, steals everything, puts it into his little bag, leaves his calling card, which is the Jack of Diamonds, there in this safe, relocks the safe, goes back out the window, this kind of thing. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because really intelligent people aren't criminals. They don't have to be criminals. It's too risky for an intelligent person to become a criminal. You're too risky. So why would you do that if you're bright enough to make your own money? Why would you risk spending the rest of your life in jail when you don't have to do it? You can get it legitimately. You can just go out and do it, make it, buy it. So when you look at the prison population, you find there are two things that correlate very, very highly, and they're both tied into your question. One of them is fatherless boys. Most of the violent criminals, something like 85% of the violent criminals, did not have a father present. And virtually all levels of crime are connected to IQ. Now the problem here is most of us don't understand most of us don't really understand what the difference of 20 IQ points can be. But one of the people that doing the research of this and did some interviews, he basically says that a lot of people who commit crimes simply are not thinking about the consequences. They just don't think about it. There's an iPad. It's sitting on the table. Can I get away with taking it? Yes. All the things that happen downstream, what happens if I get caught? What are the consequences and so on? So they just don't factor that in. But this business about encouraging low IQ populations to propagate at accelerated rates. Well, I have to give that one a little bit more thought here. What's happening is, Matthew, is our society is becoming more and more complex. And we move into an information age out of an industrial age. And the fact of the matter is that it requires more intelligence to be somebody working in the information industry than it is to be working an industrial job. I have nothing but the highest respect for people that work in industrial jobs. Some of the mechanics that work on my car and so on, my airplane, I meant to say. I just have nothing but undying respect for them, their intelligence, and their ability to do things that I just simply cannot do. But if you think about an assembly line job, which is a guy basically screwing one thing onto one place and one part gets screwed onto the place, and he does this for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or whatever, you can certainly survive in an industrial society with a lower IQ than you can in an information-based society. Now, the problem is that so many industrial jobs have left the United States and basically been shipped overseas, where it's cheaper. And what's happened, if you look at the history of how things like inner cities develop this kind of toxicity, which is where a lot of a lot of these assistance programs and welfare programs are. What you find is, even as late as the 50s and 60s, you find that the poor people there are the black people that maybe moved up from the South 2 or 3 generations ago. You find in the 50s and 60s that these people were not only fully functioning, working people who were making a good salary. You found that Baltimore, for example, used to have the neighborhoods that are now just simply war zones at for probably 60, 70 years. They'd have street parties at nighttime, and they would just have people just walking down the streets, and nobody locked the door, and white people, black people, everybody's more or less waving at each other because everybody's working. No one's on the dole. No one has to be as envious as you are when you get a gift instead of when you work for it, and so on. So as these industrial jobs leave, you are left with people who are not able to leave, and that in itself is an interesting question. Why they don't go? Why would anybody stay in Detroit? Some people are just, I guess, emotionally connected to families or places or whatever. But in any event, what you get is you get something that looks a bit like a lake drying up, and as the lake continues to evaporate, the water in the lake gets more and more alkali until finally you're just left with nothing but crystals there out in the middle of you got a flat lake bed out in the desert. And that's what's happening with our cities. The jobs that have allowed people to work and have a full membership in American society as people who have their own money, make their own money, do their own jobs, pay for their own houses, buy their own cars. All of those things are predicated on your ability to contribute and have the self-respect that comes with being able to contribute. And the Baltimore story is very clear for me. And if you really want to get into this deeply, I really cannot recommend this highly enough. You might want to read a book called The Corner. They turned it into The Wire, which was an amazing TV show, which I never saw a single episode of. But if you buy the book, I cannot recommend that book highly enough. Really, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Just The Corner, it's called. It's the street corner where you buy drugs. And in The Corner, you realize that the 15, 16-year-old drug pushers who are out there selling, speedballs, heroin and cocaine and stuff, are the children of people who worked in factories, and that at the time that their parents were young, and certainly their grandparents were young, these neighborhoods weren't just bombed out buildings that have been sealed up and boarded up and all the electrical wire been ripped out of the walls. These were beautiful little houses. And they were beautiful little houses because they were owned by private individuals, and private individuals took care of them and could afford them because there were enough industrial jobs for people on the entire IQ spectrum to be pretty much self-sufficient, and off you go. So I don't think that these assistance programs are necessarily propagating low IQ. I think that the economic reasons and the change, because this information age threshold is this kind of thing's only happened twice before in human history. When you went from being a hunter-gatherer to being a farmer, that was something of this magnitude. World-changing, independent of cultures, independent of everything. When you went from agricultural societies to industrial societies, that changed all but everybody in the world over the course of hundreds of years and so on. And we're going through another one of those, and they're traumatic. And that's what I think is basically happening here. We become more and more wealthy. Yeah, I think that's obviously true. And as that gap between the people that can function in an information age and those who can't, as that gap increases, the desperation and the sense of alienation on the part of the people who are stuck there, remaining in areas that used to be industrialized. And it's not just them; it's us as well. We Americans, with internet and all the rest of it, we think about these inner cities like Newark and Chicago and St. Louis and all the rest of it, and it doesn't feel like our country. We think, oh, to hell with those people. You know, they're just killing each other, and they're causing this murder rate. You know, if you look at the murder rate in Plano, Texas, it's lower than it is in Belgium and New Zealand and all the rest. So we tend to look at these cities and go, well, it's almost kind of like they deserve it. You know, just kind of like they deserve it because because they're mean people and they're violent people. But this is when you get into the actual chicken and the egg kind of thing here. They're mean and violent because they have nothing else to do. They have nothing else to do, and that's not something you can fix by throwing $1 billion at it. What we've done is we've said, okay, these people have nothing left to do. They have no other means of income. Let's give them money, and that has made them dependent, and dependence makes you mean. No good deed goes unpunished. People who have an obligation to somebody who you owe a large debt to, it takes a very unusual person to not have a lot of resentment towards that person. So basically, this is the trap that we're in. We've had entire sector of the economy disappear, a sector that allowed people of a very wide IQ spectrum to find a paying job and a livable wage and all the rest of it. Buy your own house, get married, have kids, raise kids, send them to good schools and so on. That's before the government started stealing $3.5 trillion a year from us too. The work that we did basically stayed where it was. We didn't have to give up these kind of taxes and all the rest of it. And so what we did was we gave these people money instead of giving them jobs or relocation or something like that. But you're dealing with a problem here because you're dealing with IQ. You can't fix stupid. It's true. When you get down to the actual statistics, the amount of intelligence that's inherited is very high compared to the amount of intelligence that is culture. I didn't know that 5 years ago, and I wish it weren't true, but it is. It'd be nice to think that if you could take anybody in the world and raise them, send them to Yale, then they would all be, Supreme Court justices. But that's just not true. So, Dave Big Booty is basically getting to the point I was just trying to close on here, and that is, in fact, it's pretty much verbatim. This is our problem. This horrible cancer of violence and drug use and completely wasted lives and constant fear and constant agony and constant sadness and grief and all the rest of it. These are American people in these cities, and their fathers and grandfathers built those cities, and they don't belong to some different country that we can just kind of ignore. The guy who wrote the Corner, I've forgotten his name now. The guy said basically that that what we do is we basically pay a bribe to people. We basically pay a bribe, and the bribe is we're going to give you just barely enough money in exchange for you, not rioting. So some of it's nurture, and a lot of it's nature, and we should, regardless of the job or the IQ level or any of that stuff, we should make it the policy of our government and our country to not give people money. Give them jobs, even if it's just a job, even if you're just cleaning up the street job, give them a job. They earned it. Every single one of the welfare programs that do work, like the ones the Mormons have, for example, they give people jobs and they go home with a paycheck. They don't go home with a charity check. They earned it. They're worth it. It connects the labor with the reward. It gives them the basic fundamental self-esteem that anybody has who makes their own way. So Cheryl Tomey says that IQ and criminal behavior are not mutually linked, damn it, but they are. So there you go. Anyway, that'll do it for that one. Let's see, we'll do 7:30. I maybe do another one or two. All right, let's see. Spaceship question 1. I like it already. Will spaceships always look unstreamlined, or are there future factors that could eventually push designs in that direction? For instance, cold plasma shielding, which would be more like a cloak of charged fog rather than a pseudo-solid barrier, seems like it would be more effective over a smooth surface area. I'm assuming that was the end of the question, but I'm assuming like a sphere. if you'd asked me this question, George, 6, 7 months ago, then I would have said no. We are, in fact, unstreamlined is the way to go. Unstreamlined is you can make the case that there's so little of the universe requires streamlining. Virtually all of it is an area where streamlining is not needed because there's no stream, right? I mean, virtually all of the space in the universe, I mean virtually all of it, is open space, vacuum. So streamlining is just something that's used in those very, very small portion of the universe that has an atmosphere that's worth traveling through. So obviously the first people to visualize rocket ships and spaceships and so on assumed that they would be looking like rockets because that's about as far as they thought about it. No one had ever been in space before. No one had ever had the experience of it. If you look at the von Braun animation that I love so much, I want to say it was 1957 or so, and Disney cooperated with von Braun on what a trip to space would look like. You end up in a delta-shaped aircraft, a very pointy-nosed aircraft with a very, very supersonic kind of a needle nose, and even the space station is relatively streamlined. The idea that you could just stick things on there, you could just stick a solar panel on this station, was beyond even von Braun. He had nothing to compare it to. So once we started going to space, we began to realize, okay, we don't have to do this. Mercury capsule is pretty streamlined. So's a Vostok capsule. They're essentially spheres. Ours are basically cones, but they're designed to go through the atmosphere. So we get some experience with that, and the next thing you know, we're up there long enough to realize, no, we can in fact hang a solar panel from this. I don't know if Salyut did it, but I know Skylab did. So going back to the early 70s when we started to get comfortable in space. So up until now, I would have said, no, absolutely. Anything that's going to go places from here to there is going to be unstreamlined because there's no reason to streamline it. Streamlining adds weight. It basically adds weight. If you've got a structure of something, we'll take an airplane, for example. If you had an airplane in the vacuum, you wouldn't need all of this weight of streamlining. You could just pull the surface layers off of the wings. You maybe want to keep the wings because that's where the fuel is. You could pull all of this stuff off of there. It wouldn't affect it at all. So there's no reason to be streamlined in space. And yet, George, I see Elon Musk's vehicle for the Mars mission, and they said this is not what the vehicle might look like. They said this is the vehicle. And the vehicle is uncannily like the artillery shell in the George Méliès film From the Earth to the Moon. Uncannily like it. It is essentially a round, rather a pointed, looks like an artillery shell, and it's got windows around the outside. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, my God, that is ugly. That is ugly, 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 ugly. It just looks retro. It looks bulky and dumb and stupid and primitive. But that could very well be the future. I mean, I think basically what Elon Musk is saying, yeah, we're not going to change vehicles. Look, he's done the work on it. He's put hundreds of millions of dollars towards, well, not hundreds, but certainly tens of millions of dollars towards studying this problem. And he has come to the conclusion that the best thing to do is to keep everybody in the same compartment, which means that you launch in the same vehicle that you land on Mars on, and then you come back and land on Earth with the same vehicle, and that vehicle needs to be streamlined because you have atmospheres on both ends, and it's a trip to the moon. Thank you very much, Wild Goose. So that's why suddenly I begin to realize that it doesn't necessarily have to be. It might, in fact, that you could make a case for streamlining. I never thought that I'd see anything. I'd never, ever in my life thought I'd see a rocket land on its tail. Boy, there was a series of children's books called Tintin, and they're mostly big in Europe. I don't think they ever got very big in the United States. But one of them was Tintin Goes to the Moon, and he basically went in a rocket with the Thompson twins and some others and his little dog and so on. But this rocket looked almost exactly like a V2, except it had kind of bulbous three fins instead of four, I think, and they had bulbous things at the bottom. And when this thing, and by the way, it was just painted red and white crosshatches on there. And this thing just lands on the moon, and then up it goes back into space, flies back to Earth, and then lands on its tail here on the Earth. And I remember thinking, oh, probably when I first saw it, I thought it was fine. But from the time I got to be 14, 15, I said, that's absurd. No one is ever, 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 ever going to land a rocket the way the rocket took off. You can land a space shuttle, fly it back, but a rocket booster is gone. And then they did it. Then they did it. They did it. They landed a rocket, and it's exactly the way I thought it would never be. It's precisely the way I thought we would never see it. It is coming straight down in the same way it's going up, and it's falling. A little bit of a burn there to just keep it from going supersonic probably, and then at the very last second, lots of thrust and a big cloud of dust in there. It sits the same way it was when it took off. That happens. I've seen it, and you have too. It's absolutely amazing. So, all of the things that I used to be completely convinced were settled just because of economic reality. You don't need to streamline things in space. Turns out that this problem is more complex than I thought it was, and people who are working to actually build one of these things say, no, this is the way to go. And if he goes to Mars, if he just puts people around the moon next year like he said he was going to, then I will get down and kowtow to the genius of this guy. Because he's an incredible man, really, and they all are, Bezos and so on, and Blue Origin and so on. So yes, it is possible that the future will be streamlined and push designs back to something that looks like from the 50s. Okay, I think we're going to do one more. Richard Puckett has a great question, but Richard basically answered the question in the question that I was going to go with for that. So I'm just looking at this and trying to find something interesting for the last. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this last one. And this is Robert Winefield. Yeah, we'll do this, and then we got to go. I got to record some shows here. Robert Winefield has this to say. Care to comment on the following observation? Advocates for individual freedom try to form organizations to increase their reach and fatter faction or... Okay, so I think, I'm sorry, Robert, I'm probably just not understanding it, but it looks to me that what you're saying in the first paragraph is people who are advocates for individual freedom try to find organizations, but organizing is antithetical to people who are individualists. And that's the first part of what I'm reading as the questions. Collectivists who do the same succeed because their top-down goals dovetail with the nature of organizations. For example, GOP establishment versus conservatives in the GOP Tea Party factions, and so on. And he's got some good examples there. And he says, if I'm correct, how do we fix that? Are we doomed to have the barbarians pull Rome down around our ears? That is a superb question. That's a superb question. So the question is, if you have two different schools of thought, and you have people who are individualists and you have people who are collectivists, organizing increases the reach of either one of those philosophies, and one philosophy is antithetical to organization, and the people who are wired that way chafe at any kind of a hierarchical structure, any kind of organization that we're familiar with. And I just gave myself an interesting answer there. While the other group of people, the collectivists, are perfectly happy to form all kinds of different organizations because that's what they do. Their identity is in the group. Their identity is in the collective, not in the individual. So what do freedom-loving individuals do to fight against the fact that collectivists organize far better than we do? I think I just accidentally stumbled on the answer Robert. Yes, I did. The way we beat this is we have to rethink what an organization is. We can't change our natures. We can't tell people who don't like to be told what to do that they're going to have to like to be told what to do in order to be able to live so that they don't have to be told what to do. It's just not going to happen. So we have to change the nature of organizations, and that's actually helping us in a big way because the left and the collectivists are very top down. They're very centralized. They're very hierarchical, very structured. They call themselves a bunch of wandering hippies, but when you get down to the hardcore people, the Bolsheviks were the most over-organized group in the history of the world, with the possible exception of the National Socialists. And when you've got a giant collectivist government like that, everything has to be stamped, everything has to be approved, everything has to be written in triplicate. Just the paperwork alone chokes all of the, forget the productivity out of society, chokes all the fun out of it too. So collectivists do tend to organize hierarchically better than individualists do. That's true. So we have to change the nature of organizations. And what we do by that is we get rid of top-down organizations and we get rid of structure. I know that sounds like a contradiction in terms. The very term organize, to organize something comes from your internal organs. It means rather than being filled with a bunch of goo, we've got some of the goo that does one thing well and not another thing. The heart doesn't filter urine, and the liver doesn't process oxygen. They are organized. They are compartmentalized, reduced, specialized, and compartmentalized is what organization means. So how do you have an organization without that? How do you have an organization without structure? And in other words, how do you have an organization that individualists could be comfortable with? And the answer is, I think, is that you start off with the idea that there is no hierarchy and that there is no structure and that there are no there are no above you, below you relationships that I'll qualify that in a minute. That nobody comes in at the bottom of a pyramid and works their way up, that no one is promoted beyond somebody else because they're curried favor, and all the rest of the things that we individualists just can't stand. So if you think of an organization like a government, you got the president, you've got the Congress, you've got all the bureaus, you've got the heads of the departments, you've got the deputy heads of the departments, you've got all the people who are middle managers, and then you've got the standing army of all the people doing all the work. It's very vertical and it's very clear. But because of the information age, because of computers, Robert, it's possible to think about things this way. It's possible to think about think about it this way. You as an individual have a series of skills. You probably work a job, or maybe you're retired. Now you don't look retired from your icon. In any event, most people have a job, and that's their identity, and that's what they do. I'm a political commentator. My fiance is a photographer. Some people are telephone linemen, and so on and so on and so on. But that's a very old way of looking at things, because we're all actually more than that. There are a number of things that I can do well enough to get paid for them, and this is probably second or third. And that's true for most people. So if you begin to look at people differently and start looking at them not as bricks, but probably as molecules, a brick goes into position and there it stays. It is cemented there. Molecules assemble themselves from atoms, and then they can also be broken down and go back to kind of the soup of molecules. So what I think we're going to see happening, regardless of whether we want it to happen or not, is this. When we have the ability to do what we're doing now, when we have the ability to connect individually on a one-to-one basis, then if everybody has that ability, let's just say for the sake of the argument, that everybody has the ability to be connected to everybody else, then what you will find is individuals can go into a system like that as individuals, and the organization will arise completely organically. Sorry, that's not the word I wanted. It will happen completely. It will happen in an unordered, unpredetermined fashion. people with certain skills will find other people working on a project that they personally find interesting. They'll attach themselves to that project, and that working group may be one working group, and people in might be in parts of other working groups, and so on and so on and so on. This is the whole idea of the common sense resistance, actually. So you don't have to worry about the problems that individuals have with hierarchies. You don't. You're not the boss of me. Well, you're not the boss of me. No one's keeping you here, and we don't have a promotion schedule. You're coming into this as an individual with a set of skills. The problem requires a certain set of skills. The problem probably requires that certain people are able to give orders to other people, but you're joining voluntarily, and you're not taking a knee, and you know, you don't have to, you get the general idea. So it's possible, in fact, I think it's likely that the Organization for Freedom-Loving People will be organizations that don't have any vertical structure. And they're much harder to kill, by the way. A headless organization is very, very tough to kill. I think the book is called The Spider and the Starfish, something like that. A very, very good book on this subject. Really got me thinking about it. And basically what it says is if you cut the leg off a spider, you've now got a 7-leg spider. But if you cut the leg off a starfish, the starfish will regrow the leg, and the leg will regrow the starfish. So this was the example that they used between these two different kind of things where one thing has got a head and extensions, and the other thing's basically just this giant organism that can reproduce itself. So the example he used was Napster. You guys remember Napster from back in the day? So basically the example that these authors gave was this. You have finally got the internet, and you've got the ability to basically send large amounts of data back and forth without going through a hierarchical system. And the reason Napster basically started to work was this. Somebody realized that since music is digital now, and since it can be downloaded and uploaded, somebody said, why do I have to buy all the albums that I want? Why don't I simply buy a couple of albums, upload those albums, trade them with people who have some music that I want, and then that way they get the music they want, I get the music I want. I only have to pay for, in the initial trade, half, but as time goes on, a microscopic portion of the amount of music you could get. You pay, $5, $6 and get essentially unlimited music. So once people realized that this was a possibility, and it does show the leg really does regrow the starfish. You see the video of it, it's just shocking. In any event, so there's Napster. Now, Napster, and in fact the whole idea of internet downloads is practically fatal to the music industry, at least as we understood it, in the same way that digital copies of DVDs and bootlegging movies has really hurt the film industry. But so basically what happened was the recording studios and the artists, all the people who owned the music, thought, wait a minute now, here's 15, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people with my music, and only one guy paid for them. That's not right, and it's not right. So the law was on their side. So what they did was they basically, all of this stuff was coordinated through Napster and Napster servers, and you had to log on to Napster and do all the rest of it. So they basically went after Napster, and what they did was they shut Napster down. And they prosecuted a few people pretty heavily so that people realized if somebody else wanted to start this kind of a centralized music warehouse, then they were likely to get in trouble. And so that didn't end the problem. It just meant that the structure became non-centralized. There was software that allowed people to talk to other individuals. You didn't have to upload to Napster and download to Napster. You could basically connect to individuals and just swap them back and forth. And then there were other systems that were even more dispersed. And every time that the establishment went to attack the problem of music piracy, they created a new organization, and each time they did it, it got tougher and tougher and tougher to kill because it's more and more and more dispersed. You can shut down Napster. You can't shut down email. If I want to email you a tune, it'd be virtually impossible to stop me. But then the problem is, how many people do I want to email tunes to? So in any event, this is a good example of a structure that started out in kind of a traditional way and then went to a non-traditional way. And the example I always use, I'll use it one more time, then we're done for the night, is something that I saw happen in real time right in front of my eyes. It's absolutely amazing. It was in 2004. And about 3 weeks before the election, the October surprise was Dan Rather does this report, and basically the report says that George Bush, who was running for re-election in 2004, George Bush was AWOL. He left his position in the Texas Air National Guard without permission, and they had a letter to prove it. So basically, 2-3 weeks before the election, CBS News is dropping this bombshell that George W. Bush was either a coward or maybe he was drunk or whatever. He was AWOL. He wasn't worthy of the respect of the military or anybody else for that matter. He basically ran away from his duty. And this was all predicated on a letter that came from the, whatever it was, 11163rd, I want to say, Air Wing or whatever it was. So this was the evidence, this letter that CBS News has uncovered. And sure enough, the letter looked like it was, was happened back in 1967, 68, something like that. It looked like an old letter. And if you just glance at it, you think, wow, that's pretty compelling evidence. But this is where the unstructured organization really happened in an amazing, amazing thing. So CBS was stupid enough to post that letter on its website as evidence. Here's the proof. You don't have to take our word for it that George Bush is a coward and a slacker and a layabout. Here's the letter. Here's your evidence. So the evidence is up there for the public to see. Now that means that millions of people are looking at this letter, or certainly thousands anyway in the beginning, and you've got thousands of people with different perspectives and so on. And one guy on Free Republic, guy's name was Buckeye. Buckeye looked at this letter, and he realized that when it referred to Bush's group, let's say it was the 1160, let's say it was the 168th, whatever it was. There's a number like that. But he looked at the letter that was supposedly written in 1968 or something, and it was a 168 and then TH, but the TH was raised and very small, the way that it would appear on a computer. If you ever used a typewriter, you know that the way you write 168th is 168th, full-size T, full-size H. And this guy just looked at it and said, that's not from 1968. That's what computers do. It's a fake. And now this thing is happening so fast. So people are connecting on this thing. I mean, it really happened in a couple of hours. So back before he lost his mind, Charles Johnson was on the side of the good guys, and he was a graphic designer. So Charles Johnson sees this post that Buckeye makes. It's making the rounds now because we're in a political war here, and we're almost at showtime. And somebody says, that's right. And a lot of people saying, that's right, we got him. So then what Charles Johnson does is he basically takes the contents of the letter, he types it into Microsoft Word with the default settings. He doesn't change anything. He puts a typewriter font in there. He doesn't change the margins, doesn't do anything. He puts it in, types it up, prints it out, and then he does a GIF comparison or a GIF comparison, whatever you want. A basic, here's the old picture. Here's the one I just printed out in 2004. Here's the one that claimed from 60, one on top of the other. And when they flash them back one on top of the other, you realize they're absolutely identical. But the one that's older has been aged and it's blurrier and it's got dust on it and all the rest of it. But they were absolutely identical. So now you've got two people in on this. You got Buckeye who found the problem. You got Charles Johnson who's proving that it was done on a computer. And then the Buckhead, sorry, not Buckeye, thanks Steve, is Buckhead. Now the third step kicks in. Dan Rather and the Democrats fight back and they say, whoa, I mean, they're caught. They're really in trouble, and they know it. So they were saying, well, it's true that you couldn't, but there was a typewriter in 1968 that would do the small uppercase TH. Really? Yeah. Well, it was like $150,000, and it was used in, print shops, graphic design shops. So it kind of makes you wonder why. Major or whatever, lieutenant colonel at a Quonset hut in Texas in the middle of nowhere in 1968. What is that guy doing with a $150,000 typesetting computer and writing, run-of-the-mill memos on it? It doesn't make any sense. So then they gave that up, and then they finally said something to the effect of it could be done by using a certain ball or something on the IBM Selectric. That's the part I'm still hazy on. But the part I'm not hazy on is this. Somebody said the IBM Selectric or something some form of the IBM typewriter could in fact have done it in 1968 or whenever the year was. And then somebody said, no, it couldn't. It could not have done it. And basically people said, well, who are you? And this guy said, I'm the chief engineer of the IBM Selectric. I'm the guy who built it, designed it. And I'm telling you, you can't do it. And so that's another expert that attached himself to this. Nobody said, hey, we got to find the guy who designed the IBM Selectrics. Nobody said, we got to find somebody to overlay these things. People just came to the party with a skill set and they applied them, and I think it saved the election, and I think it was the first step in the destruction of mainstream news media. Dan Rather to this day claims that it's authentic. Dan Rather he's simply lost his mind. Dave Big Booty was saying fake but accurate, and that's where they were finally left to leave this thing. Well, it's okay, so maybe this letter is a fake, but George Bush certainly went AWOL. Well, how do you know? Because we don't like him. Well, where's your evidence? We don't have any evidence except for this evidence that we had to fake. That's where you are with the left. So you can't form organizations that are not anathema to people who are individualists, and that's, I think, the hope for the future for us. And now it's just about 2 hours, and I don't know what the final score was. I think 6-1 or something like that. Not that we were really keeping score, but congratulations. Who was it? Was it Steve Darrow? Steve Darrow absolutely, no, was it? Yes, absolutely stopped me cold with a vapor barrier. Now I have to go read about vapor barriers, because if I find something I don't know something about, then I have to go find out what it was about. But in any event, that'll be doing it for us right now. Here it's time to go home for episode 150, the Stump Bill edition. Congratulations to Steve Darrow, who did the stumping, and the other questions were very good too, so it confirms my theory that unless we're in very, very, very narrow waters, I can basically just talk about anything forever, and God knows it's easy to sound authoritative. Whether you're actually correct about any of this stuff, that's a whole nother matter. In any event, there you go. So this will be the end of episode 150. We'll try to get that up for you as soon as we possibly can. Back to the long format videos, and we will be doing firewalls again. I promise. Tried a whole bunch of things with live shows and stuff, but we're getting back to what we're good at, and we're shooting 3 of them very soon. So anyway, that's that. Thanks everybody for joining me, and as always, thanks to the members of BillWhittle.com who make this room and the cameras and mics and all that other stuff possible. We could not do it without you. It's been a pleasure as always, and I just, every now and then I catch something. Merlin said, please reread the message. It was different than what I said. I understand it was about simulation and digital stuff, Merlin, but the fact is the non-digital stuff was stuff that I was basically spent a lot of time talking about. So there we go. Anyway, that's great to see everybody. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks again to our members, and we will hopefully see you next week. Let me check something. Because there's some birthdays coming up. Yes, I think I'll be here. All right, so that'll do it. Thanks. We'll see you next week, and you guys be careful out there. Okay, bye-bye.